my name is Melvin McInnes, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor to be the scientific director of the Prechter Bipolar program. This is a program that has been ongoing now for, I got a slide here, for approximately 13 and a half to 14 years. The fundamental theme that we are focused on is the understanding of the mechanism of disease, to look into the biology, look into the cell, look into the mechanisms of cells to determine where things are going amiss. The second theme that we're focused on is the capacity to predict outcomes. And so we're looking at the course of illness over time, to look for patterns, to look for predictability, asking a fundamental question: is there something in the pattern of the individual that can help us to predict what the course of what the illness will be? We're incredibly privileged to have the support of the donors here. Without the support of the donors here, we would not be able to do the work to the level of detail that we're able to do. So we have individuals, participants that are providing us with information on a regular basis. Sometimes it gets a little bit annoying to have the same question every 2 months and many of you kind of know that. But in fact, it gives us reproducibility. It gives us the same question, every other month, and so we can start to look for patterns. And so we're working with individuals that are mathematicians, that are physicists, that are taking this data and transforming it and looking for patterns. So we have just looked about 1,307 individuals that are in our database, and I looked yesterday. So we have literally billions of data points on these individuals. We have whole genome sequence. We have points along over the course of time. And there are many people that are really excited now to collaborate with us because we have this depth and level of detail. We have singularly the largest database of its kind in the world. We just came back from Israel, where we were collaborating or starting a collaboration with individuals at the Weizmann Institute there. And they searched the world around to look for a database that was exactly like the one we have. And so we were very privileged that we were contacted by them, and they were very, very, very enthusiastic, about them. So now we also have the support of the University of Michigan, and we're very delighted that many of the support systems, both within the Depression Center, in the Department of Psychiatry, and throughout the university, have supported us. So one of the supporters have been the individuals in the video or the audiovisual department that have helped us by making a number of videos. And so our most recent video, I was just told to hit that button, it'll go black, and something will happen, and the video will play. Okay, good, thank you.
I've been exhibiting symptoms of bipolar since the age of 6.
My parents always thought that I was very moody.
Rational thinking doesn't come into play.
The two parts of my brain don't leave.
I have an outlier brain. People can relate to it. Stress. And burn them out. They can't.
I can't work.
They can turn you up with your mom.
Yeah, go on the streets, depressed.
John sings. Because I love him. My sister. Look at her. Yeah, that's true.
Become someone unrecognizable to myself or to
It's under control. We're enthusiastic because we feel and we're convinced the street from every dimension. We're understanding
what we're really trying to do is simulate what a person might be feeling or how they might be. Neurons fire. Their signals are much stronger bipolar individuals than healthy individuals.
See that reactivity in the lab.
fast. So when the cells fire with a greater intensity.
You'll see that flash of light. They're more active, they're more reactive to chemicals, and cells come from controlled individuals.
Their neurons are firing so strongly.
What the longitudinal study has given us is this vast wavelength phenomenon. The longitudinal study is kind of like it's part of
So there are interneurons they connect on and act as so this synchronization is function. This is off. So what we're trying to do is kind of work
great. So you think the brain,
I believe that there are the cusp of major neurological
Life-saving.
solving conversation.
predict when someone just by using mobile technology.
will give clinicians the opportunity to monitor the well-being of their patients.
Do that. It's
Leverage.
Thank you very much. And so, and also just thanks to all of those who participated in the video, in particular those that helped make the video. So it was a great experience. I really had a wonderful time participating in that. So now I want to call up our panel members to take a seat here at the table. Let me just put this microphone back. And once again, I'm going to ask those that have questions on their 5x3 cards to hand them to our assistants will be walking down the hall or the aisles. And I'm going to ask the panel members to introduce themselves just one by one. So, Kay, you've sort of introduced yourself already, so I'll give you a pass on that. So, Dr. Dallek.
Gregory Dallek, Chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Michigan.
Hi, I'm Sue O'Shea. I'm a professor here in the Department of Cell and Developmental Biology. Our lab is really focused on doing the stem cell research studies. So you saw a little bit of the pictures of the stem cells in the film, but I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how we get the stem cells. And they come through individuals who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder and controls, i.e. undiagnosed individuals, who donate a very small sample of skin, which is then transformed into stem cells. And with those stem cells, we can cause them to form neurons, glial cells, all kinds of different cells and tissues of the body so that we can, for the very first time, study bipolar disorder in a tissue culture dish with the real goal of understanding mechanisms that are involved in this disorder, testing new medicines and new pathways.
Hi, I'm Emily Maurer-Provost, and I'm an associate professor in computer science. And the work of our group is really interested in trying to understand how we could use speech to understand behavior. As it turns out, our speech tells us much more than just what we're talking about, what we're saying, what's going on in our interactions. It really tells us fundamentally how somebody's doing. Now, that how might be because someone's expressing emotion. The how might be have to do with someone's gender. It might have to do with someone's age, or it might have to do with someone's health status. And so increasingly, what our group is looking at is how we can recognize aspects that have to do with health from the speech signal. And as it turns out, this is sort of an amazing thing to do right now because we're all walking around with these incredibly powerful computers with us all the time, our cell phones. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how we can use speech that can be collected in this really unobtrusive way to learn more about what people's day looks like outside of a lab, outside of a clinical environment. Because if we could do this, not only can we have really interesting new algorithms, which from a computer science perspective, we like that, but we get to understand more about human behavior. We get to understand how things like emotion impact health. We get to understand how social interactions lead to certain types of long-term outcomes. And so our group is really motivated by not only coming up with new algorithms that will forward the development of new speech-based technologies, but really enabling science. That's what we do.
Hi, my name is Mike Buwati, and today I'm actually representing the NAMI organization for the state of Michigan, as well as you probably as you came in, NAMI Washington is here. So I definitely encourage you all to see that table in the back. I'm also a participant in the longitudinal study that Dr. McInnes was mentioning, and of course I am a patient. I have bipolar 1. So NAMI, of course, is an organization called National Alliance on Mental Illness. What they do really, in a summary, is that we try to educate people about diseases, mental illness specifically, as well as we advocate and, of course, try to support through connection groups and support groups as well. The goal, of course, what NAMI wants to offer up is hope. And with that hope, of course, is that with proper medication and therapy and support and resilience, we feel that anyone that has the illness can have a successful and a blessed life.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And so what I'm going to be doing now is sort of reviewing the questions as they come in. I do try to kind of group them together and pick a particular theme and then present that to the panel. And so what I like is, 2 or 3 panel members to comment on it, to have a kind of a discussion around it. So there's one question here that over the years that I've not seen before, and it's thoughts on the role of time perception in mania and depression. And so, is time perception important? What happens in time perception in mania and depression? And so, I'm going to hand this to the panel. Perhaps Kay, you could start, or whoever would start with this to comment.
Well, I think that when you're manic, FedEx isn't fast enough yesterday. So I think you're impatient, you're speeded up, your sense of time is wildly distorted, and it comes across in speech and in the way you move. I mean, it's just everything is distorted in terms of rapidity of thought, rapidity of speech. In depression, it's molasses, it's plugging, is time dragging.
I would say further, I guess my expertise on this august panel is perhaps as a clinician treating individuals with bipolar disorder and working with their families. And I think the molasses of depression is part of what makes that phase of the illness so difficult, because it feels like time will never pass, and that the misery of that state will be permanent and long-lasting. And sometimes that's what plays into the sense that an individual can't take it anymore. And so trying to create the sense that things do move and there is the opportunity to get better is one of the features that we try and emphasize in treatment as well.
Do you think that this is actually has a biological substrate? So I understand that there's a perception of things going slower or faster, and that there's a perception. But do you think that the perception of time has biology behind it?
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah. The answer is yes. Yeah, but do we have any? Yes. Thank you. Okay, for my follow-up question on that, and so this is another interesting one, and that is the interaction, between moods and memory in that. And so, how do moods affect the capacity to make memories, both short and long term? Does that affect the memory? Mike, why don't you start the comments on that one?
I guess I could comment on that since I actually go through this. So when if you're in a manic state and you really are, think of it as a, I call it the Super Bowl analogy. So, the Super Bowls you buy at Walmart, and you buy it for 25 cents or at the 5 and dime. And I compare that to like a ping pong ball. So if you throw a ping pong ball on a table, it usually has a variation of just a little bit. Everybody can throw a ping pong ball and it's pretty much the same. Throw a Super Ball down and you usually get very extreme highs and extreme lows. What you actually end up happening is that you forget what's going on. And that's what happens is you're usually 10 steps ahead of what the current situation is. You're not present. And by not being present, you don't remember the situation. Time is of really very little significance, and it escapes you. And what ends up happening, of course, is you have to look back, and I've done this myself, and look at old movies or whatever to think through what has happened at a birthday party, for example, because I have instantly forgot. I was already thinking 10 steps ahead about the gifts, the cakes, and stuff like that. We're still at the salad. So that's kind of what happens when the time is just lost.
And I think obviously for depression, part of the diagnostic criteria include difficulties with concentration and memory. And so a different form of that occurs in which the sense of being able to focus on things outside of you is impaired. And so memory gets distorted. I think one of the things that was remarkable to me about Robert Lowell was his capacity to remember some after his manic episodes. Because for a lot of folks that I work with, they often don't remember, and sometimes that's seen as a blessing in some respects. But he was able to reflect on that in some way.
Remember part of it.
Yeah, I think it's important to appreciate, or to have in one's mind that never make the assumption that someone will forget something that happened during mania. So that's a very very important thing to but it's unpredictable and it's challenging. So I have a question here for Sue O'Shea. Can you use stem cell technology to study different kinds of bipolar disorder? In other words, is there opportunities in the stem cell reach or stem cell programs to really to categorize bipolar disorder or to help us delineate the different types of illnesses?
So I would say that that's where we hope to get. So these are very early days for stem cells and stem cell biology and studying bipolar disorder. But I think the goal for us is to really be able to partition the various kinds of behaviors of the cells and therefore maybe suggest different treatment approaches. That would be a long-term goal for us.
Yeah. Now, so following along the research question in the context of the impact of research, and so Emily, you know, the impact of how do you see the impact of research? How will research impact bipolar disorder and the current approach to bipolar disorder?
That's a great question. So we see two main impacts. The first one has to do with the opportunity to prioritize care. So one of the big challenges that we hear again and again is that people are hospitalized. And part of the reason why people are hospitalized is because they have reached a point in where their illness is no longer controlled or controllable. And so what we hope to find is early warning signs that might allow us to realize that someone's in need of care before they reach that level. Because if they can, we will have the opportunity to intervene. So the first thing that we see is just this idea of this idea of prioritization, which I think will have a huge impact. The second, as I sort of spoke about earlier, is this idea of understanding. There are so many things that are subject to recall bias, this idea that you get somewhere and you're asked how you were feeling, or you're asked what was happening, or you're asked what the social interactions around you were like. And I don't know about anybody else. I have a memory of a goldfish. And so if someone's going to ask me about something that happened the last week, there's going to be some problems remembering it, unless it was extremely, extremely salient. And so what we see with these kinds of technologies that measure behavior, what we call in engineering, in the wild, really just outside of a lab, outside of a clinic, is this opportunity to remove the need for recall bias. You don't have to remember because we have privacy-preserving ways of measuring. We have privacy-preserving ways of reporting. And so what that means is that we could have an understanding that's enhanced. We can understand how social interactions are changing, how emotions are changing, how different types of financial transactions are changing in the advance of these illnesses. And this will give us a new way of understanding actually what's happening. So the second one is understanding.
Yep. So this really kind of plays into, with Gregory and Kay, the individual treatment plan that we had and that we still have, but it was really introduced years ago. And so how will this influence the individual treatment plan?
Well, from my point of view, I mean, the hope is that with an engaged individual, it will allow some prediction of where things are going and alteration of treatment in conjunction with that. The kind of thing that we typically depend on the support system, families, and the social network around the individual, if they're engaged, to be able to have a sense that things are not going right. I mean, you wrote in your book that Lowell's family kind of could tell when he began to write more and was escalating and could predict at that point that, you know, the situation was going to go out of control. Obviously, it's hard for families to always know that and pay attention to it. It's often easier in retrospect. But these kinds of measures could be kind of a real-time biological barometer of when things are heading in the wrong direction. And then it's a question of, you know, are you engaged in your treatment? Are you taking the medication? Are you attending various other forms of therapy? If so, you know, do we need to make an adjustment? Is it time for a change? Something else going on in your life that may be stressing you and leading to that? So it provides an opportunity to make an inquiry rather than waiting till the next appointment or hoping that a family member will call and say, you know, something's going on and I need your help.
Thank you. So, as a question here, Kay, about Lowell, you mentioned that Lowell did not romanticize his illness. Can you comment a bit more on the benefits and the downfalls of romanticizing bipolar disorder? And in other words, sometimes I've heard, well, he's got bipolar, so therefore he's creative. There's sometimes kind of a suggestion that because someone has bipolar disorder that they're creative. Does that help or hinder the case or the individual?
Well, I think there's no question that it's a difficult, field to plow in the sense that you don't want to romanticize a bad illness. And what we were just talking at lunch about at Johns Hopkins early next year, we're going to be having a consensus conference of people who treat bipolar illness of how can you talk to patients recognizing that there are good things associated with this particular illness without romanticizing it and without overlooking the fact that it is a very bad illness and that it kills people. So and the notion is that a lot of doctors just put patients off immediately by refusing to recognize that there are good things associated. And in fact, there's a very large literature showing that there are good things associated. So I think what you want to do is be able to engage people in treatment and say, look, this is great, this is terrific, this is what we hope to keep. We're going to do everything possible. It's going to be a joint effort and so forth. But you've got to realize that, it's progressive. It's not good for your brain. Mm-hmm. You live by your brain, and each time you have a manic episode, it's taken a hit. So you want to present the complexity to patients rather than just putting them off by totally focusing on the pathology. Because if you lose people out of treatment because you don't appreciate that a lot of people value certain things in their illness. They just do, right, wrong, or indifferent, they do. And what you want to do is say, okay, fair enough, there's some evidence to back that up, but there's a lot of evidence that this is a bad illness, very treatable, and so forth. So I think you just want to give patients a lot more credit for having something between their ears than patients usually are given credit for. And I think particularly to emphasize this, and I don't think you have to mention that. You can just say up front, the last thing I want to do is romanticize that. I preface every talk that I give on creativity, the relationship between creativity and bipolar illness, by saying this is not meant to romanticize. Right. This is a bad illness. Yeah, I mean, I think people can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Sure. Do you think that did Lowell, his age of onset? I can't remember exactly when it was, but did he start writing poetry before his first episode? In other words,
he was deeply disturbed as a child, even. Right. So, and he went to a child psychiatrist, when he was 15. He started writing poetry when he was 17. He wasn't overtly manic, but he was certainly, I think, moody would be an understatement for what he went through.
So then the follow-up question: do you think he would have been a great poet without having bipolar?
I think probably not. I don't know that you have to. I mean, one of the questions always is, in talking with patients who write, for example, is can you have just one manic episode and get everything you're going to get out of the changes in the brain, the changes you think, the experience, without having to keep on going through the catastrophe that the illness becomes. Yeah. But I think there's something like, like the Basquiat seed in Australia, where you have to have fire for a seed to release. I think in some people that's true. I think Lowell's language is very reflective of a certain propulsive manic energy, and indeed his early poetry was very much so.
Thank you. Very, very excellent points made. So there's one very interesting question here, and it's just one word here: marijuana! Exclamation mark! Question mark! Question mark! And in small letters here, and bipolar, and parentheses question mark. And so, Mike, do you have what is the position of NAMI and bipolar and on marijuana? It's becoming increasingly common in the country, and medical marijuana and so on.
No, NAMI doesn't take a position on on marijuana. It's we don't even take a position actually on any specific doctor or drug or things of that kind. There's obviously research on both sides of the fence that says marijuana is good or marijuana is bad, obviously. So we're there to help individuals with coping skills and marijuana doesn't fit into coping skills, obviously. So we're really looking at how to use, behavior changes, thought process changes, obviously in addition to more of a three-legged stool concept, which is using a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a support system, having all three talk to each other. And with that in mind, that's going to be the foundation of recovery for that individual.
What do other members of the panel want to comment on?
It's really bad for bipolar. I think the literature is pretty straightforward on that. Marijuana doesn't help your bipolar brain. I think the issue again is how you can talk to people without being judgmental and without being so restrictive that you lose their sympathies and ability to listen. I think one of the problems now is that obviously marijuana is much more potent and much more laced with other things. So it's not.
I've heard the comment that this is not your mother's marijuana.
It is not.
Stuff
it's not even your mother's morning glory seeds anymore.
Yeah. But so I've had individuals come and say, look, doctor, that this helps me sleep. I get a good rest, and at the end of the day, I have 2 hits and I sleep better. Dr. Dallek, we hear this from time to time.
So it's a very complicated issue, and the fact that policy and the tide of legalization makes it much more available, makes it much harder to study because there's much greater noise out in the community with the use of it. And so the approach that I take is to try and engage in a discussion without being judgmental, to understand what role it might play, and to figure out whether there are other ways we can achieve the same benefit, to look at the course of illness and try and understand if we begin to address various variables, where does that leave the marijuana? And for many patients at some point, we come to the marijuana and say, well, we've tried to adjust everything else and things haven't gone well, or the course of illness has been unstable. Maybe it's time we look at the role that the marijuana might be playing in all of this. And so try and approach it that way. But it's a very complicated issue, and you do want to try and maintain your alliance so that you're able to be open to the possibility that some component of it may be doing something that's beneficial. But usually if people end up in my office, it's not doing as good a job as they would hope, right? I mean, in terms of, so we have to recognize that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a very important topic, and people are divided by it. I appreciate it. So we have a research-oriented question that I'm going to sort of pass on to Emily and Sue in their respective fields. And so, why is it important for us to know more about pluripotent stem cells? Why is it important to know more about speech pattern? How will this inform treatments going forward? So why is this? Why should we be doing this?
So in terms of treatment, I think I'm probably not the right person to talk about that. But in terms of understanding how patterns are contributing to someone's wellness, so I think the important thing about really focusing on particular types of measurements and understanding how those relate towards broader wellness is that it gives us as a community a better understanding of certainly what symptom expression means. It gives us a better understanding of how individualized, how specific to a given patient symptoms actually are. And with a better understanding of that, I think it leads to this notion of sort of this constellation of individuals. It's not this one size fits all. It's not, which is certainly something that the medical community knows, but it just gives us a better understanding for just the huge amount of variation that's present. And actually, while talking about this, I do want to just make one sort of ancillary point, which is the reason why I could sit up here at all and say anything about this is just because of the amazing collaboration that has existed at Michigan for quite some time, but from my perspective, the past 6 years. because the reason why engineers get to have any opinion about these sorts of questions whatsoever is because of really structured, really detailed, really interactive engagements with clinical populations, with clinicians, with psychiatrists, with other medical professionals. And it's because of this that we get to understand what should be measured and how it should be measured and what's meaningful and what's interesting to engineers but not interesting to anybody outside of the community. And it's because of this rich interaction, it's because of donor support which enables this style of rich interaction that we really get to have the sort of the next generation of understanding.
So, Gregory, please.
Well, I guess the way, Melvin, that you presented it early on, right, is that this is capitalizing on that observation that families make. We knew that things were beginning, we could tell by the speech and the activity. And I think when I try and explain this to patients and families, it may be bipolar disorder, it could be heart failure or diabetes or coming down with the flu. You begin to sense in yourself that something has changed and that it means something. And can begin to predict that something is off. Do I have to check my blood sugar? Do I take my high blood pressure pills? And so when you think about the myriad other signals that are emanating from us through our phones and our interactions, this begins to systematize it even before we might be aware of it. It doesn't have to even cross that threshold to then say you're heading in a direction that's going to be problematic for you. So it makes intuitive sense, in terms of what families observe and what individuals can reflect on afterwards, but it brings the science and the rigor of quantifying it in such a way that you don't need to wait even for that threshold.
And it's actually these styles of interactions that lead to the next generation in technology development too. So one of the things that Melvin also told me early on was this idea of you can hear it in the voice. That was, I think, actually the original pitch for us working together. And, for a long time we had that in the back of our mind. And then a few years ago we were thinking, okay, so you can hear it in your voice, you can hear it in your voice, you can hear it. What does that actually mean? And then we thought, oh, speaker verification technology. The whole idea that at some point your phone will unlock because it recognizes your voice. The whole idea is that your voice is unique to you, and there are certain patterns that are unique to you. And we thought, oh, well, could we actually operationalize that? Can we take that and think about how when you're healthy, you sound like you. When you are not as healthy, be it because of bipolar disorder or anxiety or PTSD or any of these illnesses, you don't sound like you. How can we actually quantify that you could hear it in your voice, which led to one of our findings.
Thank you. So what are we learning from, why study stem cells? You thought you were going to get away with it, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still here. So I think it's a really important question, one that we have to think about really carefully before we do this kind of research, because it is slow and it's painstaking and it's expensive research that we're doing. I think it's the thing that stem cells biology can really offer, I think, to this field is for the very first time the ability to study the behavior of a neuron or a glial cell in an isolated tissue culture dish so we can figure out what's different between the bipolar neuron perhaps and the control neuron. And then we can test that. We can add chemicals directly and study those differences so that really what's been available before has been, post-mortem tissues from brains, and they're just not the same.
Repeat the question.
So the question is, are we comparing across psychiatric diagnoses? And the answer is that's really important to do. So we've got a grant to do some of that between schizophrenia and MDD and bipolar. And there are people here at the university who are starting to do those studies now. Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, so these questions, they remind me of a question that was presented to me when I was in England by this Irishman. He says, Dr. McInnes, why do you want to do this? And he said, so, well, why do you want to do? What is your question? And so, this is a fundamental question, a fundamental thing when we're talking with researchers. So what is it that you want to know, and why do you want to know it, and where is it going to take you? So that is something, and we think it's a relatively straightforward question, and it's not a relatively straightforward question. And so we've had many hours of debate as to where this would go and how we're going to make use of the precious resources that we have in order to really move the needle forward. So I have a question here that I think it's a NAMI question here, Mike, and it's regarding health disparities. And The question is verbatim here, are health disparities exponentially magnified with bipolar disorder? And the example is, well, poverty, minority groups, and so on. With the inevitable ability to predict an episode, where is the line of overriding free will? And so this becomes a really important and interesting question as to, there's a movie a decade or two ago called Minority Report that kind of, predicted capacities to break the law and how would they intervene with that. But health disparities, first, Mike, where are we with that? And bipolar.
Good question. I guess to answer that, I can only do it from my own perspective, and for me, when you're in that manic state, there really isn't anything that you would regard very highly with regard to your health. I mean, you're just you're focused on whatever your mind is trying to do at the moment, and your health is sort of put to the side. And the disparities for me, I might drink too much at the time, or I would get on a motorcycle and drive too fast, right? Get in any vehicle and, obviously put the pedal to the metal and find myself going well over the speed limit. But I guess the thing is that health usually takes a very back seat in a manic or a depressed episode. And I've had both. So, I guess I don't know if that answers your question, but it's for sure that the disparities are there. That one of the things we try to do at NAMI is we try to educate you what the disparities really are, educate the family to be able to live with it, okay, and to not actually judge. Because judging, of course, just extrapolates it and continues it. And so, obviously, with the help of psychologists and psychiatrists and medication, maybe we can bring the disparities down.
So we just have a few minutes left, and I want to ask the panel to address treatments. And, what treatments are on the horizon? Where are we with treatments? What is our trajectory, if you will, with novel interventions? So, Dr. Dallek, maybe lead us off and comment.
Well, so I think as we've said and Dr. Jameson said in a couple of different ways, the mainstay of treatment now involves several things in my mind. One is there's often a role for medication, for mood stabilizers of a variety of sorts that are out there, along with therapy, and beyond that, some strong effort to kind of regulate cycles. So we spend a lot of time talking about activity and sleep and regularity of diet and exercise and those sorts of things, because it's quite clear that we all do better when we're more regular and consistent in about those things. And the course of bipolar disorder is better, responds better to treatment when those things are more regulated. And sleep disruption, for example, or activity disruptions can sometimes be one of the factors that can precipitate the beginning of an episode to escalate. In terms of future treatments, I think you should be answering that, Melvin. But I think we tend to still rely very much on lithium, which in some places is an underused treatment. And I'm surprised at the number of people that I see who come to see me who have never had a course of lithium, even though it might be clearly indicated. And a proportion of those respond well to it. And all of these medications have problematic side effects. So we're looking for treatments that will help us figure out ways to affect the brain circuits that are involved in illness and lead to better outcomes without so many side effects. You want to?
Yeah, and so Kay, if you want to comment on the psychotherapies as well, and the utility and the future directions that we should be thinking along those.
Well, I think that, ultimately, obviously, medications, I mean, the earlier, if you get the genetics down, be able to do earlier testing, more accurate testing, get the illness before it progresses to doing real damage, I mean, that's one side, and then being able to develop drugs on the basis of what you learn from the science, I mean, as opposed to just being sort of pragmatic in how we are now. I think lithium is hugely underused, particularly given that lithium has a very strong effect on suicide prevention. You know, I mean, it's the only drug that we know has, you know, probably 50 studies showing that it decreases the suicide rate and suicide attempt rate. And from my point of view, it's astonishing how many people have never been tried on lithium because it's regarded as an old drug or a toxic drug or a difficult drug to manage, all of those things. I think what's some of the interesting things that are coming down the pike, I mean, the use of psilocybin is obviously problematic in terms of people with mood disorders because you don't quite know what's going to happen, but it's beginning to be tested with depression. That's going to be interesting. All the ketamine studies, I mean, and if ketamine doesn't work out in its own right, some drugs like it based on what the science goes. I mean, because what we have now is not scientifically based drugs so much as drugs that are
there. Yeah. So also Sue is working with cells and subjecting them to currents, and so this is to really study and understand mechanisms that drive that are underlying ECT. And so Sue, can you comment on that? And I know you've got some really interesting ideas around that because ECT is really one of the very effective ways to modulate mood, including disruptions in bipolar disorder.
Yeah, so what we're really excited about right now in the laboratory is using models of ECT. And the theory behind that is that ECT works by some unknown mechanism. We're hypothesizing that it clears the cells of misfolded proteins, or the garbage that accumulates in the cells can get cleared with ECT. It's a little bit hard to study because at the same time that ECT clears the cells of toxic misfolded proteins, it also causes cells to divide. And as those cells divide and integrate into the memory circuits in the brain, they can disrupt memories. So that's been a problem, memory disruption in ECT. We're also looking to use drugs that can clear the cell of these toxic proteins. And they can, particularly Rolopram, which is one that was used at one time and is no longer in therapeutic use. But those are the kinds of things that we're able to test in tissue culture models like ours.
Thank you. So there's one final question here about the genetics. And so how far is the understanding of the genetics with regards to bipolar disorder progressed? And so I'm just going to take the moderator's prerogative and answer that. And so the genetics we've identified a number of genes that are involved both with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and major depression. So what we're finding in the group of individuals that we're studying specifically is that there's a whole kind of a catalog, if you will, of genetic variants that have been reported to be associated with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. So when we looked at the catalog that's still less developed, just the catalog of bipolar genes, and these are genes that each in and of themselves are contributing a very small amount to the illness or of the relative risk. We didn't find so much significance there, but when we looked at the whole catalog, the catalog that included all the genes known to cause or contribute to schizophrenia, then we found a difference in the distribution. So if there's like 100 genes that have a particular hand-waving signal, and someone with bipolar disorder has, say, 50 variants of that catalog that are known to contribute. So we're finding a shift in the number of genes that have the risk variants, within those catalogs. So each single gene in and of itself is not the smoking gun, if you will. When I started my career 30 years ago in this field, I was convinced that we would find one or two smoking guns. That didn't happen, and it's not going to happen. What we've found, however, is that each of these small little variants are little hand-waving signals and saying, excuse me, I might have some activity to report here, and so please go and look further, at the mechanism related to this gene. And that has given us some cause for excitement and for some findings. So that's where the status of it is. There's think of it as a whole catalog of genes that are contributing, and that you've got, a collection therein, and we have a risk score that we derive statistically around that. So with that, I want to thank so Sue, please, yes.
I just wanted to say that one of the coolest things about the stem cell project is you can actually introduce those target genes into the stem cells. You can do one or you can do combinations. You can correct those changes in genes as well. And it's a real opportunity to study those in vitro.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank the panel for just a delightful discussion and a very informative presentation of the ideas that have been developed and are percolating here at the University of Michigan and elsewhere. It's been just a delight. So I want to just give you a good clap and thank you for that. So we have we're having a reception here after this after the panel here and a book signing with Kay Redfield Jameson. I want to invite you to visit the various organizations and vendors that are out in the hall. I want to share with you that we're displaying a painting by Anna Ryan Drew, one of our research participants and an artist. She's painted it in our honor, in Dr. Jameson's, and the honor of the researchers here. So please stop by and visit that. I want to just thank our marketing manager, Kat Bergman, our research manager, Holly Bertram, and the development manager, Lisa Fabian, and the entire bipolar research team here who have been just instrumental in pulling this off and did all the logistics and everything organized. It's a fantastic job. And so I'm going to invite you to the lobby. I'm going to invite the panelists to join me in the lobby. We're going to just do a quick photo shoot with the group there. And so often after such panels, everybody comes down to the front and wants to talk. That's wonderful and great. We want to meet and chat, but we want to do that out in the lobby and just get everybody out, get the photo done, and then socialize and have some fun and enjoy the reception. So thank you all. Out there.